I had owned an Airbnb property for several years, but stopped due to the stress of maintaining it while balancing my work commitments. The advantage of using Airbnb instead of traditional renting is the potential to earn much more if your home is frequently booked. Being in a high-traffic vacation area, Airbnb was a great option for us. My wife and I were excited at first, but it became more demanding as more people booked the house. We needed to keep everything on schedule and hire cleaning services after the first guests left and before the next ones arrived, as well as ensure we responded to messages and emails promptly. Things were going well for a few years until we received what we thought was a young couple staying at the house. As usual, when they arrived, I sent them the door unlock code. I rarely saw the guests in person. Once they informed me they were in and everything was fine, I would relax for the rest of my day off. I should mention that I almost never communicated more than a few messages with the guests. Typically, they would message me when they arrived and when they left and occasionally ask a question about the house, but that was the extent of our communication. When it was 9 o'clock in the evening and I was about to get ready for bed, I received a message from the young man staying at the house. It was brief, saying he would call me in a minute. A minute later, he called. I already had a bad feeling when I saw the message, but what he said still surprised me. He mentioned that the water in the house wasn't working. Naturally, I apologized, although I didn't understand how this could be possible. But living in a house without water is unacceptable, so I knew I had to address it immediately. I asked if I could come by quickly to check so I could call someone in the morning to fix it. He agreed, being very polite about the matter. I drove over a few minutes later. When I arrived at the garage entrance, I noticed 2 cars. At the time, this wasn't necessarily a red flag, just something strange I noticed, since they were supposedly a young couple on vacation for a single night. I couldn't understand why they would have rented 2 separate cars. I thought someone might be visiting them, which in fact wasn't allowed, but I didn't care too much. I walked to the front door, knocked before entering the code, and went inside. It was very quiet. I expected them to be waiting for me, but there was no one in sight. I probably should have looked around first, but I was tired and just wanted to resolve the issue quickly. The first thing I wanted to check was the main water valve to ensure there were no leaks or flooding. So I went down to the basement and to the valve. Everything seemed normal, with no water or signs of damage. I was confused, but then I adjusted the valve and immediately heard the water start flowing again. I turned the valve further, realizing it had been completely turned off manually. I stayed in the basement for another minute, trying to understand why this had been done, before starting to feel very uncomfortable, especially since I hadn't seen the people when I entered. I simply couldn't see how it could have been anyone other than them who had turned off the water, which meant they were either trying to lure me there on purpose or perhaps get a discount on their stay due to the inconvenience. I decided I would leave, get in my car, and try to call them again just to be sure. I stood up and began walking toward the stairs, when I heard the basement door open, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps coming down. When they reached the bottom, there were 3 men there. "Is it fixed?" one of them asked, with a voice that seemed to match the one of the man I had spoken to on the phone, although all these men were much older than the young man I thought was staying at the house. I said it should be working now and that the valve must have just tightened on its own. I was trying not to blame anyone, as the whole situation was making me very uncomfortable. I just wanted to get out of that basement and away from those guys. They stood there watching me without saying anything after that. "Well, let me know if you need anything else," I said, walking past them, trying to get to the stairs. They remained there, watching me as I passed. But as I walked by the 3rd guy, the one closest to the stairs, I saw a gun tucked into the back of his pants. This made me a bit panicked, and I hurried up the stairs. They didn't follow me. They stayed in the basement as I quickly left through the door and drove away. When I got home, I woke my wife and told her what had happened. She convinced me to call the police to check it out. They weren't the people we thought were staying there, and the situation was strange, so it seemed justified. I think we waited 20 minutes before receiving a call from an officer saying that no one appeared to be home and that he might need me to open the door. I gave him the code, and he called back another 20 minutes later, saying there were no signs of anyone there. The next day, we discovered that the card the man used to pay was stolen, and after searching the house, we realized they had stolen some decorations and expensive appliances. I guess there never was a young couple. The only thing that remained unexplained was their plan regarding the water not working. I think they wanted me not to charge for the stay so they could use the stolen card for a longer period, or they were planning to rob me at gunpoint. But then, it makes me wonder why they didn't do it. 3 dangerous, unidentified men blocking my way out in the basement after luring me into a trap, and then just letting me go. That doesn't make sense to me. After that, I never went to the house while guests were there, and a few months later we stopped using Airbnb and put the house up for traditional rental. I was taking a solo trip to Salt Lake City last year. I had never had the chance to vacation before, and when I did, it was always with my family. This was the first time I could finally enjoy my time elsewhere on my own. I know it sounds a bit strange, but being alone is perfectly fine with me, especially since I rarely have the chance to be by myself. I searched both hotels and Airbnbs in the area, and surprisingly, Airbnbs were much nicer and less expensive. However, the cheaper ones were a bit further from the city. Since I was driving my own car, I didn't mind the short drive to get to the city and chose a spacious Airbnb. It was small but had a good kitchen and bedroom, which was all I really needed. I arrived at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. The owner sent me the code, and I brought all my things inside. It was very pleasant, much better than the small apartment I shared with a roommate. Once I unpacked and settled in, I collapsed on the couch and turned on the TV. After a 10-hour drive, I was eager to relax for the night and enjoy the peace. I fell asleep quickly, but it was only around 7, so my body woke me up a few hours later. It was just after 10, and the TV was still on. I grabbed the remote and turned it off, then went to get a glass of water before heading to bed. As I walked from the living room to the kitchen, I felt a strong draft of cold air. With my tired eyes, I looked to the right and saw that the front door was wide open. My eyes widened, and my heart raced. I stared at the door for a moment and then looked around the room. I knew I had closed and locked the door, so this really frightened me. I walked over to the door and closed it gently, listening intently for any signs of someone in the house. For reference, I'm not the tallest person in the world, but I'm relatively tall and fit, so unless the intruder had a weapon, I felt confident I could force them out. I grabbed a kitchen knife, still in silence, and moved from room to room, checking every corner of the house. There was no one there. This only confused me further, so I sent a message to the owner asking if someone was supposed to come by that night or something, explaining what had happened. It was late, so I didn't expect an immediate response. I went around and locked all the doors, then checked the house again, even more awake than before but still very tired. I went to bed and fell asleep without any issues. However, when I woke up, I was much less calm than before. I heard something outside, not outside the house, but outside my bedroom door. I didn't know what to do and just froze, hoping that whoever was outside the room would make a move first. While lying there in bed, I thought about how the person could have gotten in. The only person who would have the door code was the owner, so honestly, at that moment, I was sure it was him. This gave me some courage, thinking it must be some weird guy who likes to spy on guests at his Airbnb. I got out of bed, still not hearing anything else, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand to call the police. It must have made quite a noise because almost immediately someone started running away from the door and towards the front of the house, which only scared me more, knowing that the intruder had been standing right next to the bedroom door the whole time. I dialed 911, but during the time it took for the police to arrive, nothing else happened. The person had left. I found a hotel to stay at for the rest of my vacation, but the craziest part is that the Airbnb owner gave me a refund, as he was able to prove it wasn't him. He was very concerned about the situation and was really a very kind elderly man. It was frightening enough to think it was the owner, but knowing it was just a random guy makes it even more terrifying. I don't know how he got in or why he was spying on me, but it still gives me chills to think about it. What haunts me the most is waking up and seeing the front door open. Now that I know someone was actually in the house, it means whoever it was came in and saw me sleeping on the couch, then went on to do whatever they came there to do. It's really disturbing and scary, and it makes me never want to stay in an Airbnb alone again. I was staying in a small 2-bedroom Airbnb during a trip I took last year. This place was just a stopover before heading to the other Airbnb where I would be spending most of my vacation. The place was clean and empty, just as I expected when I arrived. I walked around the house to familiarize myself with it before bringing in my luggage and sitting on the couch. It was probably around 8 p.m. when, as I was starting to doze off a bit, the doorbell startled me awake. I looked at the front door, confused and alarmed. I'm a young and petite girl, so it's safe to say that I get easily frightened and don't like talking to strangers, especially at night when I'm alone. I got up and went to the door, hearing 2 men whispering on the other side. The door had no security lock or anything, so I just kept it closed and called out to them. "Hello? Hey, we're here for the Airbnb. Can you open the door?" One man shouted from outside. I asked loudly what they meant by being here for the Airbnb, not understanding what that meant. He responded by saying he had booked the place for the night. I knew there had to be some kind of mistake, so I told him, still shouting through the door, that I had also booked it and that he needed to contact the owner. The man didn't seem happy about this, although if I were in his position, I would be pretty upset too. I heard a couple of footsteps moving away from the door, while the other man asked again if I could open the door so we could discuss it. I was about to give in, reaching for the doorknob and thinking he seemed convincing, but something made me feel it was better to stay safe. I told them my husband would come down to handle it in a few minutes. I didn't want them to think I was alone, hoping this would catch them off guard if something was wrong. However, the man didn't respond. I waited another minute because I didn't hear any more footsteps moving away. But then I pulled the short curtain aside and looked through the small window. The man I was apparently talking to was facing his car parked in the garage, and past him, I saw one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. A group of maybe 5 people was further down in the garage, kind of hiding, as if waiting for a signal. They were all wearing some sort of face covering, and I couldn't see the other side of the door, but I assumed there were even more people outside. Knowing this was most likely a gang due to the city I was in, I was completely horrified. I stepped away from the door, totally panicked, and tried not to hyperventilate. I went to the bedroom to grab my phone and call the police, and I could hear more footsteps around the house. It felt like I was surrounded by a pack of wolves that, at any moment, could break the windows and get inside. I took my phone to the bathroom with me and dialed 911, trying to stay calm. The operator also asked me to stay quiet and calm, as they were sending a unit to the location which would arrive in a few minutes. I stayed on the line, still hearing footsteps moving around the house, until the horrible sound of wood bending and then cracking came from the front door. I was now sobbing profusely, trying to muffle the sound with my hand. I heard as a whole group of people entered the house, opening doors and cabinets, before one approached the bathroom door and tried the doorknob. "Here!" he shouted and then stepped away. The group continued ransacking the house until sirens were heard in the distance and they started to scatter. Everyone had left by the time the police arrived, and all my luggage was gone, along with the glass from my car shattered and also looted. One of the officers sat with me to discuss some details and informed me that they had been having problems with large groups or gangs breaking into houses recently. They don't think the main goal is to harm the residents, but rather to rob them of everything. So, it's likely that's why they left me alone in the bathroom, knowing I wasn't a threat. Whether their intentions were to harm me or not, it was still terrifying. I know it probably had little to do with me staying at the Airbnb that night, but it still makes me very anxious every time I stay at an Airbnb now.